Welcome back to another episode of Words of the Wise. Today I have Chief Baimbridge from Spring Branch Independent School District, PD. He has 33 years experience in law enforcement. Welcome, Chief Baimbridge. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Paige.
I'm really
Thank
looking forward to having a conversation with you. I saw your face when I said 33 years. Like you're like, wow,
It's
time
hard to
flies when
imagine.
you're having fun, huh?
Never thought I'd be this old. Yeah, that's for sure. I always do that like math. I go 33 years ago is 1992. What's 33 years from now? And you put it out that far, and you're like, holy cow, I'll be long gone by then, maybe. But it's hard to picture that many years or imagine I've been doing this that long. But I
Yeah.
have.
It sneaks up on you, I think you start to have different perspectives as you get older on time and the value of time and how quickly time can go. And I think when you're younger, you think you have so much of it that you sometimes put things on the back burner and you don't focus on, you know, certain proactive steps that maybe should happen because you think that you'll never be old. And then you blink, and here we are today for both of us,
Exactly.
of like,
Yeah.
where did the time go? I'm hoping that you could just give us a little bit of background, who are you? How'd you get started in this profession? And maybe some highlights from the last 33 years.
Sure. So I started in 1992. I born and raised here in Houston, Texas. I went to Baylor University, graduated. I had always wanted to be a police officer since I was a little boy. I had a friend whose dad was a police officer. I'd see him come home when I was hanging out over there playing, and he'd come home in uniform. And I just always thought it was really cool. So it's just always something I wanted to do. So when I was in college, that was always my plan, get my degree and then join the Houston Police Department. And timed it just right. I graduated in May. I started the police academy in June and took off from there. And like every Houston officer, and I would probably guess most officers around the country, you start off in patrol, which is still my favorite. I miss those days. I was a night shift officer for many years. I loved it. It was exciting. It was you never knew what you were going to get. It could be a parking complaint or it could be a homicide. So you just never knew what was the next call. Ultimately, I ended up going to homicide, which was another dream of mine, and worked there as a crime scene unit. And back then, that's how you basically, if you wanted to be a homicide detective, you had to start off either in family violence or as a crime scene investigator. And this was before the TV show CSI came out.
Yeah.
And so we were the evidence collectors and fingerprints and all that sort of thing, kind of the gory side of it, certainly the dirty side of it. But I learned a tremendous amount and ended up promoting to sergeant. And I don't want to go through the whole litany of things, but I did make my way to homicide as a murder investigator. Also worked in internal affairs, unfortunately, and promoted to lieutenant. And I worked in a number of places again back in homicide. And ultimately, I promoted to captain and made my way back to my old patrol division where I was captain for several years and then became the SWAT commander for Houston PD, which is a full-time SWAT team. So unlike a lot of SWAT teams that are part-time, this is a full-time. That's what we did, 24/7. And made with Houston, we would make anywhere from 50, 60, 70 call outs a year. And that's not including warrants. So it was a 24/7 job. You literally get calls in the middle of the night. There were so many times where my wife and I go to bed and I'd get a call out at say midnight. I'd get up, I'd change, I'd go handle the scene. I'd get back in bed about 4 a.m. And then she'd wake me up thinking I was going to be late for work, not knowing I had left in the middle of the night. So that happened many, many times. Not only could she sleep through anything, but it was just one of those things where we had to, get up and take care of a scene and then hopefully catch a few hours of sleep. But this job here in Spring Branch came available, and it was about a year after Uvalde. And I'd never really considered working in a school district. And after seeing what happened in Uvalde and my personal beliefs as to what happened, the failures and so forth, and I thought, I think maybe I'd be a good fit for that. So applied for the job, got the job, and retiring from HPD was a very difficult choice, but I knew it was the right thing to do. And so here I am 2.5 years later, and very grateful for this job and for my entire career.
Thank you. I can see you light up when you talk about your career, and I'm curious if you have any advice or if you could share the secret to longevity and avoiding burnout and still loving what you do after 33 years.
So I was very fortunate in that I met a guy early on in my career with Houston who had actually been a Houston police officer for about 8 years in the 70s and then left and came back 12 years later. So I rode with him one day, and his name was Ronnie Mashek, and I've shared this story many times. I said, Ronnie, why'd you leave? And he basically told me how he saw things happening and they were starting to eat at him, and he just stayed bitter, and it finally got to him, and he quit, and then he missed it, and that's why he came back. So he said, let me give you some advice. He said, guard yourself against negativity. He
Mm,
said, if you don't, it will eat you up. There's lots of things to be upset about. There's lots of things to get ticked off about, but don't do it. Control the things you can. And if it's out of your hands, and he knew I was a Christian, so he's like, trust God, it's in his hands. And so I really applied that to my career. And when I would hear people start griping about how much money we made or what days off we had or what shift we worked, it really I kind of laughed because like, well, nobody lied to me. I knew I wasn't gonna, be working day shift weekends off, or I knew what I was gonna make. So it was just one of those things. I always kept that in the back of my mind. Just guard yourself against negativity. And the truth is, this has been the most fun, exciting careers. I couldn't think of doing anything else. And so I've always looked at every day as a blessing that I'm just blessed to be able to do this job.
and I think that is wellness. I negativity is a choice
Mhm.
and positivity is also a choice. And sometimes I think negativity is easier and it's louder. You hear more of it from other people. I think it's easier to get upset at something and to kind of let it fester. And sometimes it's harder to counteract that and to take a moment and say, you know what? Yeah, maybe that wasn't the best. Maybe maybe something did go wrong, but how can I look at it in a different lens? And how can I choose to be grateful? How can I choose to have positivity, especially, and I love how he said, protect yourself
Yes.
because I think that it's the outside forces that are so loud and apparent sometimes. And when you're always surrounded by other people who are negative, it's easy to fall into that same cycle. And I almost kind of imagined like this barrier around you where you're like, nope, like I'm not going to let that negativity seep in, and I'm going to make the choice to be positive as much as I possibly can.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
I had another chief on this podcast and he put it into an acronym. And I always make jokes because you guys have so many acronyms and it's really hard to keep track of what they all mean. And I'm trying really hard, but he called it PMA and it was positive mental attitude. And he said, wake up every day and tell yourself, that you're grateful for these things. Wake up with that positive mental attitude and try to maintain that as much as you can. And I do think that that is a foundation of wellness. So thank you for sharing. And I'm so glad that you had someone, kind of early in your career that established that for you so that you could have that longevity and not fall, subject to the
Oh,
outside
yeah.
forces. Yeah.
Me too. And he was a genuinely happy guy. It wasn't like a fake, facade he put on. And he maintained that. He lost his son to leukemia
Mm.
several years ago. Gosh, it's probably been 15 years ago now. But as devastating as that was, he took that and began basically, I want to say a ministry, but he began by going out and getting bone marrow donors. And no telling, how many lives have been saved as a result. But that's the kind of guy he was or is, and so I tried to emulate that and throughout my career. So yeah.
Yeah. Wow. You had said something about a particular event that made you or compelled you to come to the school district. I don't know if I'm familiar with what that event was. And if, for anyone who's listening, are you willing to share what that was and why you made the decision to enter into school policing?
Sure. So Uvalde, Robb Elementary, back in 2022, that was a school shooting where the suspect was made his way into a school, into a classroom. He killed a number of students and teachers, and basically was in the classroom with kids that were either dead or dying. And for way too long, did the officers fail to make entry. And there's been a number of investigations, and everyone's got their opinion. Personally, I saw it as a failure of leadership. Don't know the chief out there, but I mean that's my opinion. Failure of leadership on his part and others, and I think a lot of it, quite honestly, has to do with failing to be prepared mentally
Mm,
and being prepared to either put yourself in harm's way. Um, I will say this, from the time I started the academy, the the mantra or I don't know what you call it, but they tell us the most important thing for you is to go home at the end of your shift. I must have heard that 1,000 times. And I kind of remember thinking, well, gosh, that seems a little self-centered, but I knew what they meant. It's to be safe, utilize the safe practices and officer safety things that they teach you. But I think in some ways that kind of became some people kind of took that like I'm the most important thing. And I'm not saying that happened in Uvalde, but I do think it's happened other times. And what I told my officers when I first came over, introducing myself, and I said, "Look, how many of y'all heard that?" And everybody raised their hand. And I said, "Well, I will tell you if the most important thing to you is to go home at the end of the day, stay home." And everybody just kind of looked like, what? I said, if your number one goal is to go home at the end of the day, then stay home. We don't need you. I don't need guys who are more concerned about themselves than they are about the kids. The
mm,
most important thing is for the kids to go home at the end of the day. Doesn't mean you should, put yourself in a harmful situation, without, just running into gunfire or something like that. But if you're more concerned with yourself than you are for the innocent people that we're sworn to protect, then I'll find someone else. And so that's kind of been my mantra, and I've always kind of kept that with me, is that I've got to be willing to run into gunfire if that's what it takes, because I've taken an oath. This is what I do. I would hope that I could create a distraction or do something that would give me that 1 or 2 seconds that I need to get the drop on the bad guy. But if it's between me and an innocent, then I have to be willing to risk my life. And so that's what I mean by Uvalde and seeing and there I know there was literally 100 plus officers that were there, and it was almost like a group think type situation. If you ever I studied sociology,
yeah.
it's amazing how people behave in groups. You get on an elevator and face the wrong direction, and many people will follow you. And I think that's what happened with the officers who arrived later, is they were just kind of in the group think or just the group dynamics where they were doing what everybody else did. Whereas I think many individually probably would have taken the right action, but they fell into just following what everyone else was doing. So but it certainly was an impetus for me to consider becoming a chief of an ISD police department.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. And, when you and I talked offline, there are a lot of interesting perspectives that you have. And one of them was in the context of leadership. And you said that leadership is like having a sense of humor. Can you like maybe finish that sentence and share your perspective on what makes an effective leader?
Yeah, it's fun. I think everybody, tries to become a better leader. And I've seen so many people go to classes and week-long conferences or seminars on leadership. And I've seen people come back and they're the exact same, or they may have a phrase or two. And it's kind of like, humor in the sense that there's people who are just genuinely funny, and then there's those who aren't. And there's different kinds of humor. There's some that are very punny, that are very witty, some that can tell a great joke. So it's not they have to be in the same genre, if you will. And I see leadership that same way. You may be a good leader in one area because you're by the book and there's no gray area with you, or some who are just very personable and can get the most out of people. But unfortunately, I think too often people try to become something they're not instead of just working with the talents that they have. Trying to be a witty person when you're not a witty person. And I had this conversation with someone one time. They kind of took offense at it because they taught leadership, and I said, I'll just be honest. I don't think you can teach leadership. I think you can hone the skills that people have, but and that's where I use my humor analogy. It's like I could send you off to comedy school for a week, and you may come back with some funny one-liners, but at the end of the day, you're still not funny. So um, I'm sure plenty of people will disagree with that, but that's just been my observation is that some people um, are just leaders, and they need to hone the skills they have, and then others they just aren't. Sad to say.
Yeah, this is like one of my favorite things about this podcast is hearing different perspectives. And we don't have to agree with everything always. I think it's important to listen to other perspectives and to have an open mind and consider what other people are thinking and saying. So I appreciate you sharing your perspective. And one of the things that I learned really early on in my career, and I feel like they kind of coexist really nicely. Um, my mentor, and this didn't resonate until later. But I remember my mentor saying, be authentically you. And it was kind of like what you said, like, take the things that make you unique and the things that you're good at, and, really try to put that into your teaching and the things that you do. And I was like, yeah, okay, sure. And the whole time I'm trying to emulate him. I'm like, he's the best. He's my mentor. He's great. I just want to be like him. And so I tried so hard to be him. And he was really funny. And he could get out, he was the kind of person that could get away with saying like really like kind of off the wall things, even like mildly inappropriate things sometimes, but everyone laughed. And then if I tried to do that, did not land the same way, right? And I had someone else come up to me one time and they said, my mentor's name was John, and he said, no one's going to be a better John than John. Like if someone wants to learn from John, they're going to go to John. Stop trying to be like somebody else. People are going to attract or gravitate to you for being you, and, be the best you. It was like kind of like one of those
Yeah.
things. But it kind of hit me later that I think authenticity is so important. I think that we do have our own strengths and weaknesses. And how can we try to be the best versions of ourselves and build on those strengths rather than trying to be like everybody else? And I see that a lot. I see a lot of people who are trying so hard to be like their mentors or be like other leaders, and you lose yourself. And there ends up being, I think, this sense of like lack of authenticity. It feels like no one really knows who you are or where you stand, or, they don't get to see you because you're trying so hard to
Yeah.
not be you. I don't know if that makes any sense
Yeah.
at all.
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Authenticity. People can see through it, and you can only fake it so long. And so yeah, it's just like you said, just be authentic, be who you are, and use the skills that you have.
Yeah, play to your strengths.
Yeah.
And, um, I think it's an interesting concept because I think we start to get into kind of this idea of nature versus nurture. You
Mhm.
know, are people born inherently one way, or can those things be nurtured over time? And I've had these conversations in so many different contexts. Professionally, also like with kids. Do they pop out who they are? Is it nature or is it nurture? And I do think that you can learn a lot. I think that there are ways to develop yourself over time. But
Yeah.
I think you have an interesting perspective and almost saying it's a little bit of nature. You kind of come out, as a leader.
And I think, it's a product of your experiences as well.
Mm,
Uh, certainly, that's why I think the study of identical twins is so fascinating when you can see the two when they're separated, and how they, do they end up exactly the same or total opposites or whatnot. And that's always been fascinating is because then you have two genetically identical people. And if they end up the same, then you could argue that it's nature. If they end up different, then it's nurture. But
yeah.
it just depends on the scenario, I guess.
Yeah, you are a sociology guy.
Well, I thought you would say sociopath, but
No. When I was in
yeah,
college, I studied sociology, psychology, philosophy. Like I was totally into all of that stuff to where I avoided doing any sort of math or the things that I needed to actually get to graduate. I just wanted to
yeah,
take the things I thought were fun. Um,
yeah.
and I've had this conversation a few times, and it wasn't necessarily with identical twins, but I do find it to be really fascinating. And I think about this in the context of like my family. So my dad was one of three, and same parents, same household, same upbringing. And my dad was well, I should say, one of my uncles is a bishop. One of my uncles, like super successful real estate guy for a while, and then my dad, drug addict, gang affiliated, incarcerated. And so it is kind of like you ask yourself those questions, is it nature or nurture? They all came from the same household. They all chose different paths, but one vastly different than the others. And so it is an interesting conversation that I think we could probably talk about for a really long time. But I want to kind of pivot into the wellness space because I know that is something that's important to you. And you had mentioned to me that you are the same weight that you were at the academy 33 years ago. And I want to know how you were able to maintain that throughout your career.
Yeah, it's funny. I was talking with someone earlier about that because we have about the same amount of time on, and he's taking really good care of himself. And but yeah, I went in at 175. I'm still 175, fluctuated 5 pounds here and there.
Sure.
And basically just watching careful. Early on, it was watching what I ate. I would look around, and I hate to put it rudely, but I'd look around some of the officers I worked with that were extremely overweight. And I thought, I don't want to be like that. You
Mhm.
know, and they get into a foot chase, and they, within 100 yards, if they made it that far, they're huffing and puffing and the guy's long gone. Um, and so we go out to eat. I work night shifts, so an IHOP or a Denny's was about the only place open. And, they have pancakes and, the Grand Slam or what have you. And I'm like, well, don't do that. So I would eat like a bagel or something like that. And, but I was always very careful about my diet. As I've gotten older, I've obviously learned a lot more about nutrition. I got more into working out and more into doing the physical. When I was younger, I didn't seem to need to. You just had that metabolism that you didn't really feel like you needed to work out. But I always played either softball or baseball. I later in my 30s got into ice hockey, and so that's something I still do. But I started working out and doing a more regimented workout routine, more CrossFit, things like that. And of course, going over to SWAT, I actually got in the best shape of my life in my late 40s when I went over there. So just hanging out with the right guys, and went up to one of the guys that was a team leader, a couple of years older than me, in tremendous shape. And I remember going up to him and saying, "Gary, you mind if I work out with you?" And he said, "Sure." First 3 weeks, I think I dry heaved at the end of every workout, and but stayed with it, and like I said, got in the best shape I've ever been in. And so it's become, my wife and I both, we work out together. And I actually ruptured my biceps tendon back in May of this year, and had to have surgery. And so that was a real tough time for me, and not being able to work out. And that's when I started losing weight. Actually, because I wasn't working out, I was losing weight. And once I was cleared to at least take the sling off, I started going back and just working my left arm So it's kind of weird to be in a gym and just doing everything with my left arm.
You're like Popeye.
Now, what's that?
You're like Popeye. You got the one
Oh,
arm.
oh yeah. So now I'm back. I'm almost 100%, but I'm doing same weight on both arms. But anyway, to answer your question, I think it's just been a consistent watching what I eat. I love sweets. I mean, I am a heroin addict when it comes to sweets. So I give myself one day a week. My mom makes these tremendous desserts and banana pudding and different things, and I'll just gorge on it. I figure, hey, if I'm gonna eat sweets, I'm gonna eat it all at once. And so, that's just been my way to. I'm not going to completely deprive myself of something I love, but I just know I can't do it every day. And I do. I've become more of an anti-sugar person over the past 5 years or so, and learned a lot about how damaging sugar is and how much it really is. I think the cause of a lot of our health problems, certainly diabetes, heart disease. You look at what your body basically turns sugar into fat, and I know there was a big the low fat versus the sugar back in the what was it, late 70s, early 80s, and the sugar people won. And I think it's done us a lot of harm. But since I've cut sugar out, I actually lost a lot of weight. And so uh, just I was up to about 180 and I cut the sugar out and I dropped down to about 170. So kind of modified that. I mean, I still avoid it, but I certainly try to eat more proteins and so forth.
Yeah. I think that observation is really powerful, and sometimes we forget to look around, and some of the best decisions I've ever made in my life were moments that I like did a hard stop. I looked around and I observed and I identified these are the people that I want to be like or I want to surround myself with. And these are the habits that I think are healthy. And then these aren't, and sometimes I think we get so stuck in like the day to day and the grind of things that we forget to take those moments of observation of, is this healthy? Is it not? Is this benefiting me? Is it not? And there's a lot of science around the circle of people that you have around you and how influential those people are. And they say that you are the kind of byproduct of the five closest people to you. And so they say like choose wisely, right?
Yeah.
Because you're going to start to adopt some of the same behaviors, mindsets, habits of the people who are closest to you. So I had a moment in my life, and because I used to be a professional skydiver. I don't know if you knew that, but I trained
No.
like I trained military like EOD, and I did certain things throughout my career.
Wow.
And I was kind of going through a burnout period myself, and I was in the plane every single time. I was probably making 8 to 10 jumps a day, and I was like, this is it. Every single time I was like, this is it. This is when I'm going to die. Every single time. And I don't know how I got myself into kind of that fear mindset of like I'm going to die every single day, 10 times a day. Um, but I had like a moment where I zoomed out and I said, okay, like I need to make some like decisions for myself and for my future. And what I recognize, and this isn't meant to like talk bad about anybody, but what I recognized in that moment is that I didn't want to be like anybody else that I saw in that environment. There was a lot of partying and drinking and um, just really not healthy behavior. And there wasn't a lot of growth and advancement. And I kind of just was like, I don't want to be like anybody here. Like, this isn't how I want to live my life. And the moment I had that realization, I was able to kind of take a hard stop. That's when I shifted gears and I changed professions and started trying to focus more on, wellness and forward progress. But I think if we don't have those moments, those hard stops, it's really hard to identify where the path is and where we want to go.
No, that's a great point. Yeah, and it certainly matters. I can look back over my life and the times I hung out with certain individuals and how that kind of led you down one path or whatever it might be. But yeah, fascinating. I didn't know you were a skydiver. So
Yeah,
how many total jumps do you have?
I had like 1,200. over a couple of
I
years.
have one, so between the two of us, we have 1,201 jumps. So
Perfect. Yeah, it was really fun. I'm in a Guinness World Record somewhere.
wow,
And trained military and it
wow,
was fun. Yeah. I was really young. I'm retired. I
okay,
haven't done it in a long time. So um, but I think that, to your point, you have also the ability, if you see the people in your life, maybe you are working with individuals and you might not necessarily get to choose the people that you work next to on a consistent basis, right? But you have that ability to also be a leader in that space and make different choices for yourself. You don't always have to follow the group mentality. You can have your own thought process. And if you guys are at Denny's, maybe get a plate of eggs instead of a
yeah,
plate of pancakes, and you have the ability to make that choice. And I think that we don't understand our ability to make positive change, not just in our own lives, but in other people's lives. And I think when you start to set that example, people will follow. You don't have
yeah,
to tell people not to do that. If the people around you are seeing that you are eating healthier, they might also start to make those decisions for themselves because they're like, oh, maybe I shouldn't be doing this. And they'll have kind of that self-observation moment too. So,
yeah,
never underestimate the power that you have to make your own decisions and to influence other people in a positive way.
absolutely, so true.
I wanted to ask you, one of the things that we talk about a lot is the fact that there's no continued requirements for physical fitness. You have your academy, and then as soon as you graduate, there's really no standard, if you will. I mean, there's standards, but there's no like mandated physical fitness type standard. And so, how do you motivate people to want to take care of themselves? Like, what are the things that maybe you have done as far as messaging or incentives, or, what is your approach to try to encourage people to maintain that level of fitness throughout their career?
Yeah, obviously, money is a great motivator for many. Not all. Now, I've learned, especially this current generation, money isn't the real motivator, or at least
Mm.
not as much as it was in the past. So we have an incentive of $1,000 if you pass our PT test, which is the Concept 2 rower, based on the Texas DPS. It has a formula based on your age, weight, gender, and so forth. And if you pass it, you get $1,000 once per year. And obviously, the goal is not to have you pass it one time, be done, but maintain that throughout. And it's very doable if you work at it. And unlike running, my old department, Houston PD, we had a similar deal. I forget, you actually got days off, which was very enticing to a lot of people, myself included. You get 4 extra days or 2 extra days, and then they went to money. But it was a mile and a half run, a 300-meter sprint, and push-ups, and this and that. And a lot of people got hurt. There was a serpentine run that a lot of people twisted ankles and tore ACLs and things like that. So they did away with that. And but to get people to stay in shape, and I think a lot of times when you're talking about that, the struggle is convincing people you're talking to them.
Mm,
And I think sometimes people think he must be talking to the guy next to me. I'm fine. I'm in great shape. But it's not until you sit down at the rower and you try to do 2,000 meters, you realize, oh, wow, I'm not in any way uh, prepared for this. My concern and what I really try to impress on the officers here is that, yeah, I want you to be in shape so you can have a long, healthy life, that you can enjoy your retirement days, that you don't have a heart attack when you're 50. But you're also here, like we talked about earlier, to protect the kids. And
yeah.
if something were to happen and you were at a school and it happened on the backside and you had to run there and run up some stairs and then deal with a bad guy, can you do it? And I think a lot of people just think, well, I'll rise to the occasion. The reality is adrenaline won't take you as far as you think it will. Adrenaline's a great drug, but it wears off pretty quickly in those situations.
Mm,
And so if you get yourself mentally prepared, physically prepared, then you can handle anything that comes your way. And I'd like to say that we could put in a mandatory you have to pass. The problem is I'd end up with 3 officers.
mm,
With our incentive program, we've had about I think out of the 74 officers, I think we've had 7 or 8 that have actually taken and passed it. So that's a very small percentage. I wish it was much higher, but I can't up the money. But I don't think at that point it's really about the money. I think it's just getting people to take their physical fitness serious, and it's a challenge. And I know a lot of departments have tried things. Some departments you can't promote unless you pass the physical fitness test. And there's a lot of officers go, fine, I just want to promote. So
Mm.
it is a huge challenge. And if anyone has a solution to that, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, $1,000 is a lot of money, but to your point, it's like what is the motivation for each individual, and trying to identify that it is really challenging. And I agree with you. Have you heard the expression where it says you don't rise to the occasion, you fall to the level of your training?
Absolutely.
I really believe that
Yeah.
because there are moments where and this has happened for me, and I'll put this in a very simple example because I don't think it has to be something tragic. I think this could be something very simple. I am not a public speaker. I have so much anxiety, and when I get in front of people, you looked like you that was surprising.
Yeah.
I'm very shy. I'm very introverted normally. In public speaking, I get really anxious and I black out fully. Like I have no recollection of what happened. And to that same point, I'm not rising to that occasion. I'm falling to the level of my training. I have to know these things to be able to operate in that moment when I don't have that same like type of mental control or awareness that I normally do. I have to like actually be ready for this stuff. It's not like, oh, it'll be fine when it happens. Because if you black out on stage and you like have no idea what's happening, you have to be mentally prepared to be able to do that, right? And so I really believe that you fall to the level of your training. And so um, um, one of the things that you gave an example for was kind of on the job, and um, I I say this a lot because I think that this has been the biggest thing that I've learned. If you're not willing to do this for you, then who are you willing to do it for? And the example you gave was the kids, your students, the people that you are there to serve and to protect. Maybe for some people it's their family too. Like what if you're not willing to take care of yourself for you? Because I think you're right. I think a lot of people are like, I'm good. Don't worry about me, like I'm fine. And maybe that's true, maybe that's not. But I think if we were all really honest with ourselves, we could all do better in certain ways. We could all improve ourselves in different ways. But I think that we're bad at taking care of ourselves. We're so focused on everybody else and everything else that it's to our own detriment. But if you're not willing to take care of yourself for you, then who are you willing to do it for? And that is what I have found the most success into getting people to take action is for each person to identify what is my why? Why is it important for me to be physically and mentally fit? Who am I doing this for? And it has to be bigger than yourself. I think
Yeah.
it has to be something that's going to get you out of bed every day. And when the
Right.
why is strong enough and the who is strong enough, then the what and the how becomes so much easier. It's
Yeah.
easier to work backwards from there, but I think there has to be that internal motivator.
Absolutely. And I feel like I've been preparing for a fight that has yet to occur. And even though I've had plenty along the way, either physical fights with suspects or, just chasing after them, foot chases and things. But, I'd get through that. I catch the guy or whatever. Maybe sometimes I get away, but, and I go, well, I wasn't training for that. That was not that big a deal. But I think, like you said, that, you know, doing it for someone. I always think to when they give the announcements on the plane that we never listen to, but they talk about if the oxygen masks drop down, parents, adults, put yours on first,
Mhm.
and then do the kid. That's counterintuitive to what I think our society teaches. Oh no, kids come first. Well, you can't take care of the kids if you don't take care of yourself first,
Exactly.
and you'll pass out. And yeah, your kid may survive, but you'll be unconscious. And I think a lot of times, especially parents will do that. Police officers they'll neglect themselves to take care of their kids. And in one sense, you get it, but the other sense, it's like you got to take care of yourself, or you won't be around long enough to see your kids grow up. And so I think you have to make yourself a priority so that you can be there for others.
Yeah, and I think everyone in your life, the most important people in your life deserve to have the best version of you,
Right.
and I had a conversation recently with someone who I care about a lot, and I was like, I feel like lately I've been getting the rest of you and not the best of you. And I would really love to have the best of you,
Yeah.
and I think everyone can relate to either feeling like that themselves of like, man, I'm just giving everyone the leftovers, or being, in a relationship or a situation where, your partner or whoever that is, like you're like, man, like I'm not getting the best version of you. And I think that the people who matter most to us in our lives deserve the best version of us. And it's our responsibility to provide that. And I know that things are hard and life is busy and it feels like there's not enough time, but I really truly believe that you put your effort and your time and attention towards the things that you care about and the things that are important to you. It's a reprioritization of your time. And so I try to think about that. I try to ask myself, am I giving the people I care about the most the best version of myself? And some days it's never going to be perfect. Some days it's a no.
Yeah.
Some days like I don't have anything left to
Sure.
give. And then it's, there's a little bit of grace that has to happen with myself internally and also the people around me where I have to communicate and say, hey, like today I'm running on E.
Right.
But I think the idea is that overall,
Right.
are we showing up as the best versions of ourselves?
Well said.
Thank you. My final question for you is for the younger generation. If you could go back 33 years with all the knowledge and experience that you have now, and you could give your younger self advice, what words of wisdom would you share with your younger self? Maybe something you wish you would have known or something that's helped you along the way.
Buy Bitcoin. No, I'm kidding. I was told to do this. I didn't do it, and I wish I had, and that is keep a journal.
Mm,
I was told by a senior officer, you're gonna go through days, you're gonna have nights, and things are gonna happen. Some nights are boring, not much happens. You might check an alarm, you might stop one or two cars on traffic, but write it down. Take just a few minutes when you get off. Just write a few things down, something to jog your memory, because there's going to be those scenes, those calls you run that are going to be really interesting, dramatic, whatever the case is. But take the time to do it. I'm like, yeah, 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 I'll remember. I've forgotten so many things, and one of my frustrations is my memory. I wish it was much, much better. Um, but talking to friends of mine that I work patrol with or my old homicide partner and hearing them tell stories, I feel like I'm hearing it for the first time, and I was there.
mm,
And I wish I had taken the time to keep a journal. Obviously now you can do it on your phone. There's different way you can dictate into it or what have you. But just take that time to do it. You won't regret it. And there may be days where, like I said, nothing happened, and you're not going to miss anything, but there's going to be those calls and those things that happen that you wish you could look back on. You wish you could recall, when it was and what exactly happened. And don't think your memory is going to, always be there. I guess it will fail you from time to time because you'll end up in a career like this. This is embarrassing to admit, but I got a call several years ago from a district attorney talked to me about a homicide case. Now that was in patrol at the time, and she told me the location and everything. I said, it doesn't help me. I've made so many homicide scenes, and she's telling me a little bit more. I said, no, doesn't help me. And she said, well, the guy died in your arms, basically. And I'm like, yeah, doesn't help me. And I was so ashamed to admit that because
mm,
I've had so many people literally die right there, when you're trying to give them aid. And then she's told me one more thing. I was like, oh, that one.
Mm.
And I was embarrassed. I mean, how sad is that that I couldn't remember a case where someone literally died, when it was just me and him. And I obviously wrote an offense report, but I didn't have any notes or a journal or anything to refer back to. Um, and so, like I said, it's something that you won't regret, and it'll help you go back and look and think. Write down your thoughts. So years later, you can look back and go, "This really was a fun job. This really is a fun job." And I think most young officers, I know I was there my first 3, 4, 5 years. I didn't want to take a day off. I love coming to work. I didn't want to miss anything. And I think it's important to write those things down too, that, maybe, stop 2 cars and, had a alarm call of what a great job this is. Remind yourself of, how you really enjoy what you do, and just keep that documentation, if you will, so you can refer back to it at some point.
I love that advice. And I love two parts of it, especially is one, having those moments to write down positivity and gratitude so that you can refer back to that as well. I think that that's really smart. It's a really good way to, keep that longevity and like we were talking about at the very beginning, that positive mental attitude and gratitude for the job. The other thing, and I don't know if you know this, but there is so much science to support that when you write things down, it's called like brain dumping. And when you can write those things down, it helps to clear mental space. So now you don't feel like it's all like in your head all the time. How can you offload some of those things? And so, to your point, like you can remember them more. You can go back and remember how much you loved the job and have gratitude, but you can also kind of leave some of that like on whether it's your phone or an actual piece of paper, you can leave it on the quote unquote paper, like and kind of close it and move forward without feeling like it has to all stay in your mind forever. And so I think that that is great. Those are great words of advice. So thank you. Thank you for your
Sure.
time. I really appreciate you coming on here. And
My pleasure.
if there's anything else I missed, I'll let you take the floor, but that's all I have for you. And thank you.
Sure. Well, let me just end it by saying, a lot of new officers, and I'm sure every generation does this, the new guys, they don't know what policing's like. I have so much respect for new officers. Going back to 2014, after the whole hands up, don't shoot, and then 2020 with the riots after George Floyd, um, I equate those officers, those ones that coming on today, to the soldiers who signed up on September 12th.
Mm.
No disrespect to the guys who signed up before September 11th, but on September 12th, just like December 8th, 1941, you knew what you were getting into. You knew we were at war, and these officers that are coming on these days, especially after the riots in 2020, they know full well what they're up against, and I have great admiration for them because you're not going into this lightly. That this is, in many cases, this is a war, and I think the tide is turning, but it's still a daily battle. So I have great admiration for these new officers and those that have stuck it out as well. But I just pray that they have as wonderful a career as I feel I've had.
I do too. Thank you. Thank you for your
Thank,
time.